I've got a lot of questions, but I think you're going to answer a lot of them in this presentation. So I'll lay it out the best I can.
Okay.
Some have proposed, based on, I think, the presupposition that the creation model can't have bipedal apes. They can't, the creation model can't have a creature that is so similar, let's say in the pelvis or the postcranial parts to human.
I think I'll answer that, but no. The thing is, why can't it have bipedal? There's no scripture that says that. It's silent on it, and when you think about it, God made the primates with 2 legs. What are they supposed to walk on their head? I mean, there's no hands.
Right, yeah.
It just
it would be kind of odd if we were
the
only ones that could walk
yeah,
upright.
It'd be odd. I mean, it creates all this in other kinds, it creates all this variability. And the primates, why can't he, with the apes and monkeys and Australopithecines, why can't he create variability in them too? Do they all have, and there is variability in them. That's the point. The gibbons don't run and walk like the chimps. The chimps are not as good as the gibbons and stuff like that. So if we look at the fossil record, why shouldn't that be the case? So anyhow, we'll get to that.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to transition now into your presentation here.
I'll go to my presentation.
So I guess before you start the presentation, the question is, based on how some have argued, that, well, we can't have extinct bipedal apes that look too similar to humans. And they've proposed, one specific individual has proposed that Lucy is really just a human pygmy. And they would say this is the best way to engage the critics, is to not say that Lucy is an extinct apish primate, but based on a lot of the features that are compared to humans, like the pelvis, for example, the femur, you're going to get into all that, that Lucy was a human pygmy. And so, Peter, I'm going to throw it over to you. And I'm very curious as to your thoughts on that viewpoint.
All right. Well, I'll just do a presentation, and we can talk more after, eh?
Perfect. Sounds good, Peter.
Okay. Is it on the screen?
Yes, I've got it up on the screen, and you're good to go, brother.
All right. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is examine the hypothesis by Chris Rupe that the famous Lucy, codename AL281-88-1, Australopithecus Afarensis fossil skeleton belonged to a human pygmy and not an extinct apish primate, the latter being the conventional creation position. And Rupe has published a position in the paper and video as follows, and these are the two, mainly the paper I'll be quoting from, and I'll just give it the page numbers, but the reference is there. The video I just quote, I think it's just one segment I quote. And Rupe stated that this interpretation doubts there are additional primate fossils accidentally included as part of the Lucy skeleton beyond the single baboon vertebra. So we're basically admitting that the whole skeleton, whether the parts of the skull, the mandible, the pelvis, everything is part of Lucy. So it's all fair game, basically. Okay. And just to show you that is the skeleton we're talking about. You can see that the skull is, so the cranium, there's not much there. I got a picture of the cranium next. You can see there. So I think the main hang up is the pelvis, and you got the femur there. And to me, it's not a big deal, but to some people, it seems to be a really big thing. So we're having a look at it. Yeah. So you can have the arm bones. There's not really much of. There's some foot bones, not much. Some finger bones, but not really much. There's a bit of the rib cage there, the vertebra. You have the sacrum, and of course the hip bone, and the jaw is fairly complete. Okay. And here you can see the skull, so it's not much. Okay. It's a bit that. So to reconstruct that, you have to use other specimens attributed to Afarensis, and that. I've got one here. I don't know if Donnie if you can see that at all. But that's the AL44. I think it's, does it say? Anyhow, it's believed to be a male Afarensis skull, and Chris would believes this also accepted as Afarensis or as an ape or whatever. Okay. Now, so Rupe admonished a group of creationists as follows. He says, generally speaking, there are two different camps in the creation community. The first group includes those who insist Lucy and her kind were an extinct knuckle-walking quadrupedal ape. This group generally accepts the Australopithecus taxonomic designation of Lucy and her kind, but in order to maintain their chimp-like interpretation, they overlook their bipedal features and argue those fossils belong to quadrupedal apes, which is easily refuted by informed evolutionists. And this is because those fossils, such as Lucy's pelvis, really do show bipedal morphologies. After all, they're human. And he says, in the more obvious case of mistaken identities, this group of creationists, which includes me, has correctly pointed out the true human identity of fossils attributed to AF, for instance, such as a big man skeleton. So that's quoting me. So he acknowledges that I did actually 15 years ago write about the Cadmium skeleton, which is actually dated 400,000 years older than Lucy's, much larger and more human-like, and likely would, if it was found dated 2 million years earlier, probably most evolutionists would say it's Erectus because that's what it sort of looks like. But of course that would collapse the whole evolutionary story. So it was assigned to Afarensis. Unfortunately, the skull and the hand and foot bones were not there, so a definite diagnosis could not be made. But in essence, there is a human-like skeleton found 3.6 million years ago, older than Lucy, but it's been classified as Afarensis. It's the same as the low footprint story. Because they're that old, humans couldn't have made them, so they say Afarensis did. But that's begging the question, isn't it? Anyhow, I won't dwell on that. But and so he says, or the fourth metatarsal found at the first family site. Yet in other cases, red herring traits, that is, curved fingers and toes, funnel-shaped thoraxes, lateral flaring ilia, cranially orientated glenoid cavity, etc., and false allegations about Lucy's pelvis reconstruction being fraudulent, have led this group of creationists to become blinded to the full human status of Lucy, as well as several other misclassified bones attributed to her kind. This has resulted in an impenetrable groupthink that insists Lucy is an extinct ape. They also committed this view that the possibility of Lucy being human has not occurred to them. So in a way, it's a no-win situation responding to this, but particularly as I'm cited in the paragraph that accuses certain creationists of having impenetrable groupthink because they believe or insist Lucy is an extinct ape and not a human. I actually believe it's an extinct primate, apish primate, not ape. Anyhow, I feel I need to defend my position. And also, I think it's in the best interest in the creation community that I respond to this. People can make up their own mind, but at least they should have both sides of the argument. Now, of course, it would have been better to do it in-house, but Chris went public with it and is urging everyone to pivot to a position. So a public response seems justified, although, like I said, it's not what one would have wanted. And by the way, I don't use the argument about Lucy's pelvis being reconstructed fraudulently. I also don't see why all of Lucy's apish traits are red herring status irrelevant, but her bipedal ones are not. Anyhow, we'll get to these things, some of these things anyhow. Got to get my mouse cursor back. All right. So here you can see you have an adult modern human female pelvis to the left. That's a small one, gracile one. An adult chimpanzee female pelvis, obviously in the middle, and Castor Lucy's reconstructed pelvis, right? So so Lucy's a bit smaller, but superficially, it does look more human-like when you look at it superficially. and one of the reasons for that is that the hip bones of the chimp are much taller, okay, and the sacrum is a bit narrower. Okay, now of particular focus in the paper is the pelvis of Lucy, with Rupe arguing that reconstruction of the Lucy pelvis all look distinctly human and not at all like a chimp. But this suggests a false dichotomy, as the anatomical facts make it both possible and reasonable to regard Lucy's pelvis as both not chimp-like and not human either, as it has features not present in normal humans. Such features include iliac blade facing more posterolaterally, laterally inferring ilia, small sacral body, a shallower ball and socket joint, the acetabulum, the extreme width of the pelvis at the level of the hip sockets and iliac crest, considerable greater width of pelvic inlet, and weakly developed sacrotuberous ligaments. Also, according to paleoanthropologist Conroy and Ponsa, the articular surface of the acetabulum lacks the large contribution from the pubic bone that characterizes modern humans. Functionally, this feature suggests the absence of full human-like extension at the hip during bipedal motion. To elaborate further on some of the above-mentioned points in regard to the vertebra in Lucy, the cross-sectional area of the lower back vertebra, particularly the lumbar and sacral vertebra, are also extraordinarily small, suggesting that they were not adapted for the bearing of heavy loads associated with full upright postures. I'm just quoting Conroy and Ponsa in this in their book on reconstructing human origins. So these are evolutionists. Regarding the sacrotuberous ligaments, they bind together the sacrum and ischium of the pelvis and are strong in humans, helping to stabilize the sacroiliac joint when the body is erect. Now, features of the sacrum in Afarensis, that is Lucy's sacrum, suggest it lacked well-developed sacrotuberous ligaments. As stated by Conroy and Ponsa, this implies a less well-developed mechanism for sacroiliac stabilization when the trunk is in an erect position. Now, just showing here, so this compares a superior view of the Lucy pelvis on the bottom and a gracile female pelvis top. So one of the things to note is the smaller cross-sectional area of the sacral body, the centrum of Lucy's, which is the green arrows in Lucy compared to the modern human. And also you have note the position of the anterior inferior iliac spine, AIIS, because I'll be talking about that. You can note the positions of that, or note the presence of that in Lucy and the modern human female. Okay. All right. I'll just blow this up. So basically, you can show here that the centrum, the sacral body, which is known as the centrum, it just shows the difference between the modern human and Lucy centrum here. That bears the weight from the lumbar region of the upper body. And so basically, the wider it is, the better it is to absorb all the load and the stress. And if it's very narrow, then you may have a lot of back problems, and you probably aren't designed to carry heavy loads for a long at a time in an upright position. So, now basically the centrum is even smaller in specimen MH2 Australopithecus adiba and Africanus specimen STS14. Slightly larger in Africanus specimen STW431. Now, it's interesting, Rupe considers the pelvis of Africanus specimen STS14 and Australopithecus adiba specimen MH2 as being human, and these two have even smaller sacral bodies or centrums than Lucy had. Okay. Now, according to Conroy de Ponsa, in Afarensis, that is Lucy, the iliac blades face more posterolaterally than in humans. The ilium also shows a typical Australopith trait of a lateral flaring anterior superior iliac spine, far removed from the anterior inferior iliac spine. Taken as a whole, the pelvis of Afarensis reveals that the wrapping of the iliac blades around the vertebral column did not match the degree of the curvature seen in modern humans. Some workers take this and the more anterior placement of the iliac pillar to mean that mechanism of lateral pelvic balance during bipedalism in A. afarensis was more similar to apes than humans. Now, according to biomechanical expert Christine Berg, who studied the hip and thigh bones of Australopithecus Afarensis, it seems that she notes that she says that not only did Australopithecus have less ability to maintain hip and knee extension during the walk, but also probably moved the pelvis and lower limb differently. She says it seems that the Australopithecines walk differed significantly from that of humans, involving a sort of waddling gait with large rotatory movements of the pelvis and shoulders around the vertebral column. Such a walk likely required a greater energetic cost than does human bipedalism. Now, although ape-like, I prefer not to call the Australopithecines, including Lucy, extinct apes, as they appear to be an extinct primate group. Indeed, according to evolutionary expert Charles Oxnard, he writes in 1987 in his book Fossils, Teeth and Sex, a new descriptive idea can be added to the prior concept that Australopithecines possess both human-like and African ape-like features. This is that the Australopithecines also possess some features in which they were specifically orangutan-like, and many features in which they were markedly different from both humans and apes. This had led to the recognition that they were not like humans or apes, or midway between them, but actually completely different from any living forms. This new uniqueness of the uniqueness of the Australopithecines was first suggested by Oxnard in 1967. So he states also, for instance, though bipedal, it is likely that their bipedality was mechanically different from that of humans. Though terrestrial, it is further likely that these fossils were accomplished arborealists. The combination of the two functions in the same set of creatures is certainly unique among hominoids. However good a human acrobat may appear, with training, arboreal activity as a human lifestyle is not the regular scene and would certainly be a total liability in escaping from predators. Likewise, however able most apes, indeed most non-human primates, may be as terrestrial bipeds, the habitual use of bipedality is not a major component of their lifestyles, and certainly not the way that they survive. So it appears that mechanically the bipedalism of the Australopithecines was very different to that of humans. Okay, now there are Australopithecines such as Littlefoot with at least superficially human-like pelvises that have very apish or non-human skulls. How we're calling it a human helped the situation, rather that would be the ideal transitional forms. Anyhow, let's just look at the anterior inferior iliac spine. The anterior inferior iliac spine is a bony prominence on the anterior margin of the ilium, with the iliofemoral ligament and rectus femoris muscle attached, the latter functioning as both a hip flexor and knee extensor. The rectus femoris muscle, according to Rupe, is used in walking, running, kicking, and raising the knees to walk steps. The equivalent of the AES in apes is flat. A bony prominence is not found in any non-human primates. It is a diagnostic human trait, and it is well preserved in Lucy's ilium. Now, in the video Rupe commented concerning AIIS, here's another diagnostic feature that only humans have in their hip. This is called the anterior inferior iliac spine. And regarding the presence of an anterior inferior iliac spine in Lucy's hip bone, that the presence of an AIIS is a diagnostic human trait that alone demonstrates this is a human hip bone. And he says, according to Rupe, the favorite creation to recognize the true human pelvises in the Australopithecus genus has only helped to bolster the evolution narrative that Australopithecines, including Lucy, were obligate bipeds with human-like pelvises, yet ape-like skulls, and ideal transitional forms. And as I mentioned at startup, I think I should have mentioned at the end probably, there are Australopithecines such as Littlefoot, which we'll get to, which has at least at least superficially human-like pelvises, just like Lucy, that have very apish non-human skulls. And so how would that calling it human help the situation? All right. Now, the claim that the AIS, the anterior inferior iliac spine, is a diagnostic human trait is demonstrably false. This is because an AWS is also present in fossil specimens that presumably no one would say were descendants of Adam, such as the Littlefoot Australopithecus brevius specimen STW573, as well as the Ardipithecus raminis specimen ARVP 6500. The skeleton of these specimens include apish skulls, which to any reasonable person cannot, I'll show you them in a sec, which to any reasonable person cannot be considered as being human, or as apish skulls commingle with human bones. It is said that the STW573 skull indisputably belongs to the rest of the skeleton. Also, the hip bone of STW573, as well as the hip bone of STW431, usually classified as A. africanus, apart from being similar, are said to resemble humans in certain features, even more so than the hip bone of Lucy and STS14, usually classified as africanus and M2H2, MH2 Australopithecus adida, yet STW573 is not human. And so I'm not sure how, if Lucy's pelvis is human, you could have a pelvis from a non-human being more human in certain features than a human pelvis. If Lucy's pelvis is not human, then it makes more sense. So here is the pelvis of STW573 and STW431. You can see here the Littlefoot STW573 is the middle one, the more rougher one, and the bottom one is the ST431. They're very similar pelvises, and you can see the red arrows sort of on the outer kind of rim or side of the ilium, pointing to the little bump there, which is the anterior inferior iliac spine. Okay, the other red arrow is actually pointing to the sciatic notch. So basically, so the small arrows there. So the bottom, the bottom two diagrams. Just look at them. Okay, so basically it's just showing you that the STW573 has an anterior inferior iliac spine, and so must be, according to Rupe's diagnostic criteria, must be human. Now this is the skull. Now obviously, no, I don't think anyone want to put that in the human family tree. Now it has some deformity from the fossilization process, but it is basically intact. And if you correct it for distortions, it's not it's not human. No, I don't know anyone would. And as mentioned, Ardipithecus raminis also has the skeleton has a anterior inferior iliac spine. That's a skull there. Now that's probably even worse. No one would put that in the human family tree. Cranial cavity has about 300 cubic centimeters. So this diagnostic criteria just doesn't work. There's also an anterior inferior iliac spine present in the recent published remains of the robust Australopithecine paramorphous robustus specimen SWT1HR2. Okay, so that was recently published in April. I'm not sure when it was published online, but it was published this year. And although it's said to be the first articulating partial os coxa that is hip bone, nearly complete femur, and complete tibia of young adult hominins excavated from roughly supposedly the 2.3 to 1.7 million year old hanging remnant and one of Swartkrantz formation. So this specimen has been estimated to be smaller in stature, 1.03 meters, than both Lucy 1.1 and the Hobbit Florensis specimen LB1 1.09 meter. Albeit this specimen diagnosed based on the femur, no skull was present at birth to the remains. Okay, so this also has for copyright reason, I don't have a diagram to show you, but this also had an anterior inferior iliac spine present. Now, using Rupe's anterior inferior iliac spine diagnostic criteria for recognizing human Ape specimen Littlefoot, Grammatar specimen, Afarensis specimen Lucy, Parameter robust specimen that I just mentioned would all have to be classified as humans, descendants of Adam and Eve. The AAWS is all present in the pelvis of Australopithecus sativa specimens MH1 and MH2, as well as Australopithecus africanus specimen STS14 and STS431. Rupe considers the pelvis of Africanus specimen STS14 and sativa specimen MH2 as being human. Rupe stated that clarity on identity of Lucy bears eternal weight. You know, is a flawed diagnosis method that, you know, it honestly makes humankind seem like a planet of the apes. Is that bringing clarity? I mean, anyhow. Now, Rupe argued that as the high bicondylar angle of Lucy's femur, 12 degrees compared to 8 to 11 degrees in humans, falls within the human range. This feature can combine with a human pelvis supports a true human identity. For comparison, the bicondylar angle in the left femur, the Littlefoot ape specimen STW 573 is estimated to be 11 degrees, and so it's also human-like. So again, and so your Littlefoot matches Lucy's human-like features. According to Rupe, when a high bicondylar angle occurs in combination with other features that are distinctly human, such as the morphology of the pelvis and or femoral condyles, that is, raised patellar lip, deepened patellar groove, and inferior flattened condyles, the bicondylar angle should count as a convincing corroborating evidence. The association of all those traits in a single distal femur is decisive evidence of human morphology and bipedality. The SCW 573 femurs also display the features described by Rupe above. As STW 573 is not human, what Rupe said is decisive evidence of human morphology and bipedality is not that decisive after all. The robust Australopithecines SWT1 femur, which also appears to possess an elevated patellar lip, deep patellar groove, and inferior flattened condyle, seems to have a hypervalgus knee that is like a knock knee, given its very high bicondylar angle of 17.8 degrees. Hence, a human-like or high bicondylar angle in the femur, as well as supposedly convincing corroborated evidence, does not necessarily imply that it belonged to a human. Now, Rupe et al. Performed a study examining bone structural properties of the humerus and femur in Lucy. In their conclusions, the author stated, although bipedal, when on the ground, the limb bone structure proportion of AL281-81, that is Lucy, provided evidence for substantial more arboreal, that is climbing behavior than either modern humans or Homo erectus. The frequency and magnitude of force required to stimulate bone modeling and remodeling of this kind implies that this behavior was adaptively significant and not a trivial component of locomotor repertoire. Possible reasons for using the trees more often include foraging for food and escape from predators. Furthermore, there's evidence that terrestrial bipedal gait in AL281, as at Lucy, may have differed in subtle important ways from that of later Homo, decreasing locomotor efficiency when on the ground and limiting terrestrial mobility. And basically, hence Lucy's arms were very strong because this was spending much time swinging in trees. As stated in a commentary by Williams, analysis of the partial fossilized skeleton, the investigators say, shows that Lucy's upper limbs were heavily built, similar to champion tree climbing chimpanzees, supporting the idea that she spent time climbing and used her arms to pull herself up. Arms like champion tree climbing chimpanzees does not sound very human-like. And although she was capable of upright walking, the study found evidence suggesting that even Lucy walked upright. Even when Lucy walked upright, she may have done so less efficiently than modern humans, limiting her ability to walk long distances on the ground. In response to anatomist Alan Lovejoy being asked if Lucy was a dwarf, his reply was told by Rupe. Lovejoy's response was interesting. He claimed that Lucy could not be a dwarf because the bones do not show any signs of pathology. That's a good response to a question about dwarfism, but why didn't they consider the possibility of a pygmy? Even today, there are a population of small-bodied humans living in Central Africa. Pygmies don't suffer from dwarfism. They have naturally short stature and normal body proportions. Hence, Rupe asked, is it possible that Lucy, another specimen from the Harder Formation, belonged to a population of pygmies? There are several lines of evidence that demonstrate why the pygmy human hypothesis is not far-fetched. He summed up the unique features that Lucy and Hobbit, aka Homo floresiensis, had in common. Lucy and Hobbit have several unique features in common, including flat-footedness, curved fingers and toes, nearly identical endocranial capacities, virtually identical limb proportions, nearly identical height, broad pelvises for lateral ilia, non-projecting chins, and possibly more funnel-shaped thoraxes with higher position scapula. The commonality of all these aberrant features makes sense that both belong to small, genetically isolated pygmy populations. So here shows a replica of the LB1 partial skeleton of the adult Homo florensis specimen LB1, known as the Hobbit. Okay, notice that it doesn't really have a thorax. So making any decision on the Shabbat's thorax has to be inferred from either the width of the pelvis or the clavicle there, the collarbone. But it's a kind of iffy diagnosis. Here's an assembled Lucy skeleton. Okay, there's some of the bits there. All right. Now, according to Transitional, the tiny cranial capacity of LB1, not its height, is its most astonishing feature. The authors further stated that for Homo erectus sensu lato, that's in the broad sense, height has been estimated around 1.5 meters with a mean cranial capacity of 904 cubic centimeters. Local Indonesian Homo sapiens have a mean height of 1.63 meters and a mean cranial capacity value of 1,350 centimeters cubed. The height of the pathological cases described in Ashmari and Murray among present populations, height 1.2 meters, is comparable to the stature of the Leah being Bua series, but not the cranial capacity. 1,000 centimeter cubes versus about 400 cubic centimeters. So basically, it's a big difference between these are pathological people, 1.2 meters, and even their cranial capacity is 1,000 centimeter cubes versus 400 for LB1, which is about Lucy's cranial capacity estimate. Now, Falk out in another paper stated, typically pygmy skulls are over 1,000 centimeter cubes. Ours measures 1,249 and resemble those of neighboring humans in shape. Unlike LB1, whose brain-body size ratio scales like that of Australopithecines, however, the ratio for pygmies is slightly larger than that found in the non-pygmy neighbors, giving their heads a relatively large appearance. This is expected because pygmies scale allometrically along ontogenetic curves, leading to relatively enlarged heads and brains, as it is the case for human youngsters relative to adults. The laws governing allometric scaling of brain-body ratios are powerful and hold within other species of primates. For this reason, and because the morphology of our endocar samples differ greatly, we do not believe that LB1 represents human pygmy. Now, stated by Martin et al. In another paper, this is all around the time of the Hobbit controversy, Modern Rampasa pygmies and floras have an average cranial capacity of 1,270 cubic centimeters. According to these authors, it is well established that reduction of body size within a mammal species, including Homo sapiens, is usually associated with only moderate reduction in brain size. Even if you scale down brain size to body size using individuals with the smallest of human brains, like the ones exhibited by the Damanesia Homo erectus fossils, the body size is untenably small when scaled down to a cranial capacity of around 400 cubic centimeters. So that at the time, skull fine wasn't known, so that it would be the other four Damanesia skulls, the cranial capacity. Like as I mentioned a little while ago in the Q&A or whatever, the Damanesia erectus lived in the gorge area. So I suspect there's some, but we know one of them had, certainly looking at the tooth sockets, had certainly some pathology, but I believe that so scale of 5 may have had cretinism. There may be others, I don't know. But anyhow, just assume they're normal human size. So Martin and state the 4 skulls from Damanesia have a mean cranial capacity of only 664 cubic centimeters, range 600 to 775. It has been suggested that the Flores hominid descended from such a small brain population, but this proposal is also unconvincing. First, with an interspecific scaling exponent of 0.25, body size would still have to be reduced to 1/8 for the average for Homo erectus, from 60 to 7.5, to decrease mean cranial capacity from 664 to 400 cubic centimeters. In fact, taking the smaller body mass of 50 kilograms estimated for the Mesa fossils, body size would have to be reduced to around 6 kilos to reach a mean cranial capacity of 400 cubic centimeters. Now, if the cranial capacity reported for Homo floresiensis reported from the dwarfing of large brain individuals resulted from the dwarfing of larger brain individuals, the situation was even be more untenable. So if you had an original body size of erectus of 60 kilos, would have to be, that body size would have to be reduced to, and the mean cranial capacity was 991 cubic centimeters. That would have to be reduced to, the body size would have to be reduced to 2 kilograms to get basically a cranial capacity of 420 cubic centimeters. So that's a real lethal problem for the theory, that the pygmies don't reduce the brain size like this. I don't know of any example of something like that could possibly do that. So in a way, that sort of kills off, in many ways, the pygmy hypothesis. The only way you can explain a small brain size like that, I believe, is through pathology. Okay. Now, and this is one person who tried to do that, Oxnard. So, and concerning cranial capacities, the researchers, evolutionists who believed the hobbit was a modern human, also believed it was pathological. And one of the reasons for this was its abnormally small brain, which could not be considered normal by any measure. According to Oxnard, skulls and brains are considerably small in pygmy or pygmoid people, and he mentioned 7 such skulls ranging from 790 to 150 cubic centimeters, which can scarcely be accepted as abnormal. So he found in literature, whatever, these 7 skulls, which estimated cranial capacity from that, so it's around twice the Hobbit or Lucy size or whatever, which weren't considered abnormal. And then basically he says congenital hypothyroidism, that's cretinism, is able to reduce brain size by approximately 50%. So if you had a really small, really small pygmies or human brains, and then they had a pathology like cretinism, which drew brain size by 50%, then you could end up something with 400 cc. So, and it's according to Oxnard et al., thus normal Southeast Asian pygmoid crania of 80 to 100 milliliters have been recorded and estimated. On this basis, cretins from such populations could have brain sizes as small as 400 to 500 mil, based on scaling of height and brain size found among European endemic cretins. But these are not normal humans; these are pathological humans. Okay, that's why the people who believed, the evolutionist researchers who believed the hobbit was a human during the controversy, they believed it was pathological because of the one of the reasons was the small brain size. So published cranial capacity values for LB1 cranium has varied from 380 to 430 cubic centimeters. Most recent estimate 426. Hence, at least in theory, the abnormally small brain of LB1 could be explained by cretinism in a pygmy human, whether a modern human or a robust human like Homo erectus. However, as such, the LB hobbit specimens suffered considerable pathology. The cranial capacity of Lucy is given as 387 cubic centimeters by the late Holloway, which at best is a ballpark figure given the incompleteness of the cranium. On cranial capacity of Lucy's cranium, Rupe stated estimates can range between 360 to 417 cubic centimeters. He wrote that Lucy and Hobbit had nearly identical endocranial capacity, and that Lucy's endocranial capacity may be underestimated. Regardless, the upper estimate cited above is approximately the same as the pygmy human from Flores, and so it is entirely possible Lucy's cranium belonged to an adult small body human. Well, the brain size would have to be pathological. Anyhow, so as discussed above, the brain size of the L-bone hobbit from Flores is too small to simply be explained as that of a pygmy human. And so it's unconvincing to use a small cranial capacity as evidence that Lucy's cranium could also have belonged to a pygmy human. I'm not aware of any data indicating non-pathological humans where the pygmies or not had cranial capacity as small as the ones given above for LB1 and Lucy. If LB1 was human, then morphology is the most logical explanation for many of its morphological features, including its small cranial capacity. While some evolutionists consider LB1 to have been a different species and hence non-pathological, one should bear in mind that they consider LB1 to be an ape-man, not Homo sapiens. If Lucy was a pygmy human, then its brain size was also abnormally small and would also have to be explained by pathology, as would many of its other apish and or Australopithecines features, and there are many. However, if Lucy was an Australopithecines, then its brain size and other morphological features would be normal for this extinct primate group. Whilst pathology seems the likely condition for LB1, to me the likely nature of Lucy is that, well, it was an extinct Australopithecine. So let's look at limb proportions. Now, Lucy and the hobbit may have had similar limb proportions, that is humerofemoral index, but they are outside the range of normal variation for Homo sapiens. Rupe gave values of 86.8 and 85.4 for the humerofemoral index of the hobbit and Lucy, respectively. According to Heaton, the humerofemoral index of the non-human Australopithecine Littlefoot is 86.6, said to be significantly yet equally distant from the means for pan and modern humans, but consistent with those derived from Australopithecus ramidus and Afarensis. Hence, the limb proportion in Lucy are consistent with values of other extinct primates such as Australopithecus ramidus and Littlefoot. Now, concerning a lot of the features associated with Homo florensis, paleontologist and anatomist Charles Ognos argued strongly that many of the normal features of H. florensis appear to fit with cretinism, as many features of cretinism appear to mimic so-called primitive features of evolution. He goes on to state that it is remarkable that so many features similar to those normally present in the great apes in Australopithecus and Paranthropus and early Homo, for example, Homo erectus, and even to some degree Homo neanderthalensis, but not in modern Homo sapiens, are generated in humans by growth deficit due to the absence of thyroid hormone. In other words, many of the pathological features of cretinism mimic the primitive characters of evolution, making it easy to mistake pathological features for primitive characters. Comparing Lucy the hobbit, the latter as if a non-pathological human when it likely suffered from cretinism or some other pathology will lead to faulty interpretation. As discussed above, Lucy's brain size was normally small for a human, even a pygmy human, and failing to recognize this further erodes the credibility of the hypothesis that Lucy was a human pygmy. Now here comparing the mandibles of this Lucy's one on the left, a human one in the middle, and a chimpanzee one on the right. Now the text quoted on the web page is for Afarensis in general, not particular to Lucy, but I'll quote it. It says the most notable difference in teeth for modern humans and modern chimpanzees is that humans have smaller canines compared to chimpanzees. The canines of Afarensis are also relatively smaller, but are still relatively large compared to modern humans. Afarensis incisors are more similar to the size and shape of modern chimpanzees. Molars and Afarensis are relatively and absolutely larger than molars in either chimpanzees or modern humans, and are wider buccolingually. Tooth enamels thicker in Afarensis than in either modern species. Okay. So now, writing in the book Lucy's Child, with co-author James Shreve, Donnelly Hanson's discoverer of Lucy gave some thoughts he had about Lucy after his discovery. The piece of mandible recovered from the Lucy site told us that her lower jaw was V-shaped, a decidedly more primitive condition than anything associated with Homo. I actually have the jaw here. But anyhow, the first premolars, teeth directly behind the canines, had only one cusp as opposed to the two found in Homo, another primitive trait. The cranial fragments, meanwhile, suggest a very small brain, not much larger than that of a chimpanzee. Indeed, at 3.5 feet tall, Lucy was about the size of a chimp. Much as I wanted to believe that Lucy was human, I couldn't bring myself to accept anything so small and apparently primitive as Homo. Now, I got here, this is an important point, and I think creationists make this mistake often. That is, Homo does not mean human. Now, when creationists talk about a human, it implies the individual is descended from Adam and Eve. Not so with evolution, at least some, at least some evolutionists, because no notice that in the previous quote, Johansen appeared to quote human with assignment to the genus Homo. However, there are many members in Homo that are not descendants of Adam and Eve. Most of the fossils assigned to Homo habilis are such an example. In my opinion, most of them belong with the Australopithecines, and some leading evolutionists would assign most of them to the Australopithecine or to some other genus. And some, so a lot of them might probably fit in Africanus. Reading out today that Ronald Clark, STW53 should be in Africanus or Prometheus, and other fossils, I think OH24. So there's a lot of this. OH62 too should be in the Australopithecines, and so basically, and there's a lot of faulty reconstructions too. Particularly, I think Carl Werner pointed out in his book with 1470 man how you could fit an endocast from. I think I'll see if I got it here. It's quite telling. Basically, the endocast of a robust Australopithecus Australopithecus robust is about 530 cubic centimeters, but that fit it neatly within the skull of 1470 man. So basically, which means that which has had estimates from just over 500 to 800 cubic centimeters for its brain size. So here you have an endocast, which is 530 cubic centimeters, fits within about 2 millimeters of the inside of the skull, the reconstruction of 1470, and basically, which means that the 1470 man, which was the icon of Homo, one of the icons of Homo habilis, ironically described by one of the people who put together the late Alan Walker as being a big-brained Australopithecine, is now not even a big-brained Australopithecine. It's because its brain size may be a couple of hundred cubic centimeters less. So there's a lot of these things. Even the book I written with Jerry Bergman documents a lot of the inflated brain sizes that have been part of this species, so-called species. I don't regard it as a general species. It's the phantom species, a sort of garbage bag where things have been tossed in and they don't belong there. I think the only one I found was, I think it's a specimen called SK84-7 that could, a small erectus-like face, which could likely belong to Homo erectus, but that's about it. And some postcranial bones, which could be interpreted as being erectus. So that's a problem. So and a lot of people think when evolutionists talk about Homo, they're talking about humans as in descendants out of Eve. They're not. They may be, but they may not be. And so you have to be careful there. So that's why I mention that. So basically, yeah. Otherwise, you can lead to mistaken and confusing interpretations. Okay, so now the first premolar of P3. I don't know if you can see it. That ought to be it here. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it? I don't know if people can see it. Anyhow, it doesn't matter, Donnie.
Yeah, I put you full screen for that one, Peter, if you want. Yeah.
Okay. So this actually compares that's the Hobbit one here on my left, and that's the Lucy jaw on the right. So you can see the dental arcades there. You can see at least the shape of the jaw is kind of very V-shaped in the Lucy mandible. The dental arcade is more kind of narrow and long and diverges slightly at the back, and it's either the molars are much larger in Lucy compared to the Hobbit as well. But this thing is only one cusp, so it looks like a sort of a, it's not a canine, but it has a more pointed end. Whereas in the Hobbit, this has two cusps. That's the human condition, normal human condition. So basically, so what I'm saying there, the first premolar P3 of Lucy had only a single cusp, which is considered by evolutionists to be the more primitive condition, with two cusp condition considered to be more human. As stated by Deleuze and the late Kimball, in both Pan and Gorilla, the P3 has a single cusp, the protoconate, which is tall and centrally placed along the mesiodistal axis of the crown. And the mandibular first premolars, Alveon, Homo floresiensis have two cusps, which is the usual human condition. So there again is another feature that of Lucy that indicates it's not human. And here's a picture. You can see there that it's hard to visually to tell that much different, but you can see the larger molars in the Afarensis specimen, and also the mandible look is more robust in Lucy compared to the Hobbit there. It may be hard to tell from the picture, but anyhow. So conclusion, Lucy's mandibles most likely belong to an Australopithecine, not a human. What can be said about the mandibles, including the condition of Homo floresiensis, is that it appears to be different from both Australopithecines and typical Homo sapiens. Now, a detailed craniofacial morphology analysis of the LB1 Homo floresiensis cranium concluded that LB1 is most similar to early Javanese Homo erectus of Sangerian Trinal. So, in my opinion, this raises the possible scenario that Homo floresiensis that may have been a robust type of human, for example, like a Denisovan or Homo erectus, and it may turn out that the Denisovans were part of Homo erectus, poorly defined, and so the Hobbit may have been a robust human pathology like cretinism. That may explain why it looks like a erectus features, the small brain, and things like that. Now, red herring traits. According to Rupe, red herring traits, that is curved fingers and toes, funnel-shaped thoraxes, laterally conferring ilia, cranial-orientated glenocavities, etc., and false allocations about Lucy's pelvis reconstruction being fraudulent, have led this group of creationists to become blinded to the full human status of Lucy, as well as several other misclassified bones attributed to her kind. Now, Rupe's argument seems to be that several ape-like traits in Lucy are red herrings because they are sometimes found in humans, whether pathological or not. And so they cannot be used to argue that Lucy was an ape or apish primate. If you use this reasoning, though, you could argue that the human-like trait of bipedalism is a red herring also, as existing apes are capable of bipedalism to various degrees. So bipedalism then cannot be used to argue that Lucy was human. I think both of these logics are really wrong. Now, however, if a single individual exhibits mostly apish Australopithecine features, that is, all combined in one individual, then the logical conclusion is that the individual was either a non-human primate or a human that suffered from considerable pathology. As already outlined, even if the pelvis of Lucy has too many non-human features for it to be human, it all makes sense that the Australopithecines, which include Lucy, were a unique but extinct primate group. They were not apes in the sense that monkeys are not considered apes either. In other words, it's no big deal. It was no big deal until Lucy as a human pygmy arrived. Then it became a big deal. That's why I'm answering this. According to Rupe, in my assessment, the real Australopithecus was an extinct ape, similar to extant great ape species AL44.2 and AL822.1. So this is the AL442. I don't know if you can see that here. So he agrees that this is an ape or whatever. To me, it's an apish primate. It's not human. Okay. So I'm just going to show you the skull here. Okay. And claims about certain made about certain fossils displaying distinctly human-like bipedal morphology. It's a telltale sign that those fossils may not belong to Australopithecus, and careful re-examining is warranted. Thus, once all of the distinctly human fossils that were falsely attributed to Australopithecus, I think my voice is going, are reclassified as Homo, not arbitrarily, but on the basis of key morphological indicators, what remains are the fossil of extinct members of the hominidae family. This will further help to fill in the large fossil record of African apes. Now, the above logic by Rupe, in which if a bone displays distinctly human-like bipedal features, it is human, is an example of the logical fallacy of petito principii. That is also known as begging a question. That is where the argument's premise assumes the truth of the conclusion. In this case, it's assumed that only human bones display such bipedal features, which is the point that needs to be proven. Further, as already been demonstrated with, for example, the anterior inferior iliac spine, Rupe's diagnostic criteria for what are distinctly human-like bipedal features are also questionable. Rupe can state his argument to be true, but that just reflects his belief. It's not evidence to strengthen the case, let alone proof. So it's again just showing the Littlefoot skull here. Making the assumption that only human bones display such bipedal features can become very problematic, particularly when you have an individual Australopithecine skeleton found with the associated skulls, such as occurred with the Australopithecus primitivus specimen Littlefoot. As discussed earlier, the Australopithecine Littlefoot skeleton displays some bipedal features, which, by some of the arguments presented earlier by Rupe, would fit his criteria of being distinctly human-like, such as a human-like bicondylar angle in its femur, and a pelvis at least human-like as Lucy's. Yet an associated skull, which cannot be dismissed as being commingled, certainly cannot be classified as human. Littlefoot essentially falsifies Rupe's hypothesis that Lucy is a human pygmy. If one were to declare Littlefoot to be human due to the pelvic features, no one creationist evolutionist would believe it. Additionally, reclassifying all of the distinctly human fossils as Homo would not help much if Homo already consists of misclassified specimen that belong with the Australopithecines. Personally, I don't know why he went ahead of this hypothesis publicly without even considering Littlefoot in his paper or whatever. It didn't even address it. And to me, that you just don't do that. You should have addressed it before going public with it. Then this could have all been avoided. Okay, yeah, just again the Littlefoot skull. Oh, sorry, not the Afarensis skull there. Okay. So I'm getting to the end now. My wife is looking at me. So, also by Rupe labeling many apish skeletal traits as red herrings, such as curved fingers and toes, funnel-shaped thoraxes, laterally referring cranial-orientated glenoid cavity, because they are in rare circumstances found in humans. How could you ever know which ones were human and which ones belonged to the real Australopithecus? And if all postcranial bones that are loosely like a place in the human category, one may legitimately ask, where then are the postcranial bones that accompany the real Australopithecines, such as the Afarensis skulls mentioned there, like AL 4442 and AL 822-1. Rupe wrote that the failure of creationists to recognize true human pelvises in the Australopithecus genus has only helped to bolster the evolutionary that the Australopithecines, including Lucy, were obligate bipeds with human-like pelvises, yet with ape-like skulls, an ideal transitional form. Rupert's position appears to be based on a sort of fear of bipedalism in non-human primates, acknowledging it will somehow prove human evolution. The main, if not the entire reason for adopting the Lucy as a human pygmy hypothesis seems to be that he worries people persuaded apes that can walk bipedally be seen by them as a missing link. Yet he fails to realize that an apish-looking primate, primarily falsely as a human, will almost certainly be seen as a missing link or ape-man by most observers. However, as mentioned elsewhere, some evolutionists argue apes like Danovius Guggenamosi, I hope I pronounced that right, were capable of habitual obligate bipedalism supposedly millions of years before the first hominin. So even by their logic, bipedalism is not a transitional form or missing link diagnostic feature. In 2019, Madeline Boehmer et al. Described the bipedal baboon-sized fossil ape Danovius Guggenami from Bavaria, Germany. Danovius is said to be a great ape with a broad thorax, long along the spine, and extended hips and knees as in bipeds, and elongated and fully extended forelimbs as in all apes, hominoids. Danovius combines the adaptation of bipeds and suspensory apes and provides a model for the common ancestors of great apes and humans. Going to state that in her book, dated to allegedly 11.62 million years,
Peter,
Guggenamosi, according to Scarabuma, had unusually I'm writing for features.
Oh, Peter, I was just I was gonna stop you right there. Feel free to take your time. I just wanted to give you a warning. I'm just gonna run to the restroom for about a minute.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna take a break at the restroom too, so I'll come back there. Okay.
Okay, Peter, you run to the restroom first, and then I'll go. I'll talk to the audience while you're gone.
Okay.
Okay, so to the audience, as you can probably tell, this has been extremely comprehensive, which is what we've wanted. We planned for, in many ways, a seminar tonight, starting off with Out of Africa Chaos, the truth about human origins. And then, especially in light of the debate that just took place, an excellent debate between Dr. Jerry Bergman and Gutsick Gibbon. Hominin fossils and the Australopithecines in particular have kind of been a hot topic. And so we also wanted to make sure that we give you guys a thorough breakdown and a complete answer on who was Lucy, what was Lucy, and what were the Australopithecines. And so if I could, as Peter is gone here for now, if I could give a bit of a nutshell review of what he's saying. Firstly, uniquely bipedal extinct apish primates, creationists should not fear the existence of those. It makes sense with morphological variation. And here's a good quote that Dr. Peter Line likes to point out. He discusses it in his recent article too. And it talks about how even though the Australopithecines were bipedal, they would not have been bipedal in the same way that humans are. They would have been unique. And one good quote here, the cross-sectional area of Lucy's lower back vertebra, particularly the lumbar and sacral vertebra, are also extraordinarily small, suggesting that they were not adapted for the bearing of heavy loads associated with fully upright postures. So there's a difference in how they would have walked upright compared to humans. And we'll discuss this in the Q&A as well when Peter's done. But Peter's done an excellent job pointing out. Oh, okay, Peter, welcome back. I'll finish this point and hand it back to you, brother. Yep. Peter's done a great job in pointing out Lucy right here, Australopithecus Afarensis, AL 288-1, the pelvis of Lucy and the more so human-like traits, like the anterior inferior iliac spine, okay, being one of them that Chris points to. Those traits are found in other Australopith pelvises. One in particular, STW 573. This is Australopithecus Prometheus. Some view that as an Africanus specimen, but nonetheless, highly articulated, 90% complete. The bones are in close anatomical association. The skull, the head, the shoulder girdle, the long arms, everything about it is clearly ape. When you look to the pelvis and other features, the pelvis is very similar to Lucy's pelvis and also the pelvis found in other Africanus specimens. Ardipithecus ramidus, same thing, similar traits and features, and also Sediba. So somebody who holds to the Pygmy hypothesis, they have to address major challenges, one of them being the status of Littlefoot. Is Littlefoot an extinct apish primate? Is it human? Because it has, according to Chris's hypothesis, it has the same, what he says, diagnostic features or traits that Lucy's hip does. But it'd be a hard sell to say that Littlefoot is human. It would also be very difficult to demonstrate that all of these parts are not one individual, because one might be tempted to say that Littlefoot represents multiple individuals to get around that. So Peter, that was a well-deserved break for you, brother. This has been excellent. We'll be clipping this whole section as well anyways as its own video for people to see. Yeah. And this is how we move forward in science. This is how we come to, because we're not only into refuting arguments for evolution, we're into model building. And when we're engaging the critics and interacting with pro-evolution arguments and anti-young earth creationist arguments, we do want to bring forth the best possible model. And that's why these types of critiques are important. They're not critiques on a person, they're critiques on a person's model or their arguments. And there's nothing wrong with that. Correct. That's the professional thing to do. Correct. So Peter, should I hand it back to you, brother? You're doing a great job.
I'll continue on. A great summary, and I'll just continue on. My wife just handed me something warm to eat. So
your wife's doing a great job. Make sure to thank her for me.
Okay. All right. So basically, the quote, I think. So I said, so this Danovis gugenmosi is dated around 11.622 million years ago in evolution time. I don't accept the date, but going by their methods of dating, and according to discoverer Pygmy, had unusual features for an ape, that is, ability to stand straight with its knees and hips fully extended and a lower back that curved gently to lend it stability. Pygmy points out that when today's great apes stand on 2 feet, they keep their knees and hips bent, and their lower backs are inflexible and too short for them to be able to stand upright with extended hips. Tracy Kibble described the mosaic features of the Danovis gugenmosi ape as having forelimbs suited to life in the trees that all living apes, including humans, still have, lower limbs suited to extended posture like those used by orangutans during bipedalism in trees, and further specialization of such features of the lower limbs in humans to enable habitual terrestrial bipedalism, that is, obligate bipedalism. Okay, so that's what's suggested for Lucy, habitual. But this is not a human; it's an ape. It lived millions of years, supposedly. I don't accept it, but supposedly millions of years before Lucy. It's not a hominin or hominid, whatever you want to call it, or an ape-man. It's an ape. They walked, I suppose, according to them, it worked habitually upright. But the foot has a long, robust, big toe that would be good for grasping, suggesting that the Danovis gugenmosi might have walked flat-footed on branches, whether or not it regularly walked bipedally on the ground as a square. See, a lot of this bipedalism is used in the trees, like orangutans walk bipedally in trees, branches. It helps you're walking out of branches, reaching out for fruit, whatever fruit or whatever is in trees. So a lot of it is also for the trees, for walking out on branches in trees, a design thing. Now, paleoanthropologist Jeremy De Silva has examined Danovis gugenmosi fossil data. Bowman and a team concluded that over 11 million years ago, Danovis was upright and walked not on the ground but in the trees. Femur is right, bipedalism did not emerge from the ground up but from the trees down. From my own observation of the fossil, I saw no reason to contradict these findings, but they remain controversial and contested. Now, Danovis gugenmosi is supposedly 11.62 million years old in the evolution timescale, which would mean that bipedalism existed millions of years earlier than the first supposed hominins. So findings such as this are a real blow to the idea that bipedalism equals hominin. That is, if apes primates in Europe were built for some form of bipedalism and upright posture, yet were not hominins, excuse me, then why would bipedal-like features in the Australopithecines from Africa mean they were hominins? The argument of evolution is that Australopithecines were hominins because they were in some way bipedal collapses. The argument that Australopithecines were hominins because they were bipedal is invalid reasoning per se, regardless of whether they were bipedal apes, primates in Europe, whether there were bipedal apes, primates in Europe or not. The Bible does not address the issue of locomotion in primate, and so from a creation viewpoint, if bipedal ape-like primates existed, it does not contradict Scripture. If God created humans bipedal, why would he not use variation on a similar design pattern for some other primates? Given how many non-human primates there are, if considering both extant and extinct species, it would be in some way seem a bit unusual if you had not. The Australopithecines may have been one such primate group. Interesting, a study on the gibbons, the holobatids, by Rosen et al. Our results show that while each study species of ape and monkey can move bipedally, holobatids, that is gibbons, are significantly more bipedal and engage in bipedal locomotion more frequently and for greater distances than any other primate sampled. These data support hypothesis of orthograde, long-backed, and arboreal last common ancestor, which is consistent with hominoid fossil from the middle to late Miocene. If two-knuckle walking evolved in parallel and pound and gorilla, then the human body form, particularly the long low back and orthograde posture, is conserved. We thus interpret our finding as indication that additional morphological features of the holobated body form, aside from the limb proportions, predispose them to walk bipedally more frequently than other primates. Specifically, a long lumbar spine and orthograde positional behavior are limitation of studies that we did not include Any lines as a subfamily of new monkeys, a family of primates that also possesses this combination of long lumbar spine and frequent orthograde positional behavior. Yet we also cannot ignore these data demonstrating that it's only primates in study with a long lumbar region and an orthograde body posture, essential characteristic for upright walking humans, practice bipedal locomotion more frequently and for longer distances than other non-human primates. In Encyclopedia Britannica, conversely, it's also possible that the first habitual walkers were already well prepared for terrestrial bipedality, having adaptations for running bipedally among branches and boughs, standing upright to forage overhead, and climbing vertical tree trunks and vines. The scenario suggested by studies of gibbons who routinely engage in these arboreal activities and virtually never elect to move on the forest floor. But if forced to the ground, run bipedally, gibbons have relatively long, powerful lower limbs, the same number of lumbar vertebrae that humans have. Great apes have fewer, and chests of humanoid configuration. When walking the ground, gibbons stand up straighter than chimpanzees, which are occasionally bipedal. All right, now I'm kind of getting to the pretty much the end here. I was going to show you. I don't know if Donnie is there to show the video of a gibbon running or whatever. He's back. You back?
I can do that if you'd like to. I can show that video.
I have one. I have one. I think it's one slide left of the consequences, and then we can go back to it. Okay.
Okay, let's do that.
Then I'll do that. All right. So now, the anatomical facts do not line up. I should probably call it conclusion. The anatomical facts do not line up with the claim that Lucy is human. The Australopithecines are simply unique, and when I walked upright, this was in a unique manner. To attempt to say that Lucy's skeleton, somewhat of an archetype in this group, is human, thus undercuts one of the best arguments in the creation arsenal in the area of human evolution. Not only that, if this proposal were to succeed in having a significant creationist following, it will allow anti-creationists to claim that creationists are either ignorant of important paleoanatomical facts or worse, are deceptively not mentioning them. So this is one of the reasons why I just couldn't ignore it. So most of the time I prefer just ignore these things, but this one can't be ignored. But this is automatically going to generate a controversy. You don't want it, but I'm not the one that went public with it first, and things like that, and then made accusations against people being, having an impenetrable groupthink because I didn't accept Lucy was a human, and so it's going to be easy for opponents to simply point out that some creationists now believe Lucy is human and some say it's not. So it's a no-win situation, but I think in the long run, it's at least give people the facts that they can make up their own mind. But I think truth matters, and so that's the only reason why I'm doing it, to be honest. All right, so that's it. And I got, but maybe show this video of this gibbon running and walking. It runs first, and you'll see it walking, and then maybe this fear of bipedalism can disappear.
Okay, let me screen share and show the video. As I'm doing that, I'll let the audience know that in terms of, because we've done a seminar here and we're going to continue, Peter, for a little bit. I have some questions for you, and so does the audience. But in terms of, yeah, and you take your time. That's why I'm filling the air. And so you take your time. I'll let the audience know that we're going to continue this because we have some more points to discuss. But in terms of a separate video, what we do, anybody who follows this channel knows, we do a lot of seminars on this channel that go 3-4 hours. And then I'll break those seminars up into smaller clips to keep it more digestible. And so right here at this point is where I'll probably stop the clip and then put out as its own video a response to the Pygmy hypothesis. And so with that being said, allow me to screen share and put to bed this fear of bipedal apes. So I think this is the video that you wanted me to show. So here we go.
Let's let it run out because you'll see it walking as well. Funny how it can spot grapes from a long distance. It's a white-cheeked gibbon.
You know, some people are surprised, Peter, when you show them these kinds of videos of gibbons walking and running upright. They're like, wow, I didn't even know, because it does look so human-like.
Yeah.
It's kind of entertaining too.
Yeah. Well, no one would mistake it for a human or ape man. That's the point. You know, they're walking there. As, you know, that's the thing. God created variation.